Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome back once again to Redemption Meditations. I'm Lee, and joined as always by Steve and Dana. Gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Lee. Hi, Dana.
Hi.
Boy, I really hope you guys are doing well. I just have to say that. I hope you're doing so good.
Better than I deserve.
Yeah.
Well, so we left on our last episode. We left everybody on a bit of a cliffhanger because last week ministry was fruitful and plenteous, and none of us had any time to record anything. So it turned into a massive cliffhanger that I'm sure has had people on the edge of their seats. So to dial back to the previous episode, we left off right at sort of a crisis point for Logansville Community Church. As far as the old building and potential to move into a new one. So I guess, Dana, do you want to take it away and pick up where we left off?
No. So I actually want to ask you guys, because you both came to the church. So I started there in 2012. So let me start with this, and then I'll pick up where we left off. Lee, I don't remember who came first. Probably Steve.
I think it was me.
What year did you guys start coming to our church, to Logansville?
I believe it was 2016, maybe the end of 2016.
Okay, I was talking to somebody last night, and I know that there was a connection with the pregnancy center that I volunteer at, and that you guys have volunteered at too, both you and your wife, over the years. And so I knew that was kind of a connection as to how you had heard of us.
Right.
And I started at volunteering there in 2016. So I was trying to figure that out. What was the church? How would you describe Logansville Church back then? So that's 8 years ago now, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And it's changed an incredible amount even just since then. So how would you describe it when you guys started coming?
It was, as compared to the church now, it was much more of what I think most people listening to this or watching this would think of as kind of the small country church. That those churches that when you're driving through the country out kind of what feels like in the middle of nowhere, especially if you live in town, and you pass by a little church. Now, the old building was more than just a one-room church when I got there, but it was a little bit more than that. But it probably struck people as being something like that. And it was certainly not nearly as many people as we have on a typical Sunday now. And it was it's what people probably might imagine when you think of just a small country church. There's not a spectacular light show or anything along those lines when it comes to the worship or singing. It was
no purple lights and smoke machines.
There's no scaffolding upon which is mounted all sorts of devices or anything like that. It's compared to some people's churches that maybe do things in a more fancy way. It would just be very kind of old school in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Lee, do you remember what year you started attending?
Yeah, I started attending at the tail end of 2017.
Okay, so just a year after the Crumbs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was invited by friends to come, and really loved it. Loved the simplicity and ordinariness of the liturgy, and I had never sat under expositional preaching before live. I'd been listening to it in various digital media for a few years, but had never sat in a live expositional sermon. So that was great. All of that really. Of course, I was a townie, so I've grown up 2 minutes away from that building all my life, but never went there.
Okay, all right. So what was you told me this before, so let's be nice. But what was the reputation? That doesn't mean it was necessarily earned, although I think probably was. What was the reputation of the church back, like when you were growing up, or
Yeah,
before you started?
the reputation I'd heard, and again, it's guaranteed it's not entirely true, but that it was sort of like a social club, like a small social club church for people that had always gone there.
Okay.
That there was no, nothing more to it than that. Just another one of the, like an, I don't know, old people church kind of a thing, um, for lack of a better term. Now, again,
Right.
I don't think that was entirely fair, um, but it was in a place that definitely revitalization was going to be needed. Um, and it did come to that point. But I had always gone to smaller churches anyway. The biggest church I ever went to was, I think they did have maybe 500 people on a Sunday morning. Nothing mega church level in any way, shape, or form. Um, but always a um, Arminian topical sermons, sort of Southern gospel-y hymns, that sort of flavor. That had been my background, and it was a good background to grow up in. But I grew up in it and grew out of it eventually. And so
Did you
Logan'sville was
ever?
exactly the right
Sorry.
place to come.
Did you ever see the Gaithers live?
I did.
Okay, just
I
wondering.
did.
I
In
have no
fact,
problem with the Gaithers. It's just that I wondered if you'd ever seen them live, and you have.
I was a kid, went to a concert in Columbus, and we sat up high enough that I actually got a nosebleed. And so
Literally.
my dad ushers me out into like the hall and stuff. And so Drew was little, so we still had diapers at that point. So I had a diaper up to my nose catching the blood, and incidentally met a few of the Gaither crew out there.
Oh,
They were just wandering around until it was their time to go on. So that was an
Nice.
interesting experience.
Mark
Mark
Lowry
Lowry. I met
threatened to
Mark
pop
Lowry
you in
that
the
way.
nose.
I had to clean my nose up before we took any pictures, but
This kid's got a diaper on his face. I can hear Mark. Anyway, Mark
That's
Lowry.
not how you
School-
use that, son.
it was homeschooler chic.
Okay, so this church is in need of revitalization.
Definitely at that time for sure. Yeah. So like I said, I'd been invited by friends. Maybe to answer the same question that you asked Steve, I think the church had already changed already within that year, because I saw it as a lot of other people started coming, especially in 2018 too, and coming from far off. So it was definitely not like a towny church anymore, the way that I had seen it or had
Yeah.
perceived it in my younger years, where it was just for people who were around here and people that had gone there forever. Now there were people that were coming from all over near Columbus and all around. So not like commuter church doesn't feel like the right term, but there were a lot of people commuting to attend there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was getting to meet a lot of people. Sometimes it was in passing because when church was done, I do remember people usually kind of flew the coop relatively quickly. Had other places to get to.
Mhm.
And so those were some of my first impressions, but definitely a very lively church. A church with a lot of kids, even at that point. Which also really wasn't my experience either. I was usually the youngest person in every church that I went to. In the church I grew
That's
up
not.
in, my cousins and I were the youth group. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
were the only kids.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me add one other thing that I think is maybe a more thorough answer to your question, Dana. We would not have even come to visit or tried it if we didn't have uh some warm feelings about what sort of preaching was happening there before we ever visited the first Sunday. So, like a lot of people probably do, at least a lot of people who probably listen to this podcast, got online and listened to some sermons and saw how thoroughly different books of the Bible were preached through. I had been to churches where we're going to preach through the Gospel of John in the next 5-6 weeks,
Right.
which is one way of doing it. And that my purpose is not to deal with that as much, but that's quite different than we're going to preach through the Gospel of John in the next 18 months. Those are two different things are happening. And I knew what I wanted for myself and my family. I knew what sort of preaching I wanted my children to sit under. So if it was going to be, the Gospel of John in 5 weeks, we wouldn't have even bothered to come and visit, because we knew this is just a no-go right out of the gate. So we had some idea about, frankly, things that I considered more important than the music or the light show or the style, or whether it was a particularly big or small church. Like, we kind of didn't care about it that much, but there were some things that were a big deal to us. And as much as you can tell before you've come to visit, it appeared to have checked those boxes, and that was just really important to us, or we wouldn't have wasted a Sunday checking it out.
Were we already doing our fellowship lunches when you started coming, Steve?
I don't think so, but I think it happened pretty quickly afterward, because I think we started to come, and it feels like the floodgates really opened on new people coming. And so so you've got to do something to try to connect with people besides just shake their hand, hey, how are you, as they go out the door, and that's it, So I think that was implemented not too long after, but I'm not sure it happened.
I surmise that they started in 2018, because they didn't start when I got there at the end of 2017, but I'm pretty sure they started within the next year when a lot of the travelers were coming in.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't remember the timeline, but here's what happened is we used to have lunch after church occasionally. So if we were going to have a body meeting or anything like that, we'd have lunch and then we'd have a meeting. So when we would do our annual meeting, we would have lunch together and then we'd have an annual meeting. And those times became just some of the best Sundays for our church, because you sit around a table with each other, everybody bring a casserole or whatever, and it was just a lot of fun. You get to actually sit across the table from a whole bunch of different people. And I used to tell, my wife and I would have an agreement, and even with the boys when they got a little bit older, like, we're not going to sit together, and we're going to sit with other people. We get to sit together all the time, but we really want to get to know other people. And so we started doing that a little bit more often. And then at some point around the time probably Steve and his family started to come, we actually moved it to once a month. And so the first Sunday of every month, we would do lunches together. And they became just such a really cool time for the church. So there's always some reason why,
especially since that was the Sunday we would take communion too at that time.
Right. Yeah. We would do communion and then we would have lunch. So purposefully we did that.
Yeah.
And there's always reasons why, somebody can't stay, they got family coming in or whatever. So it wasn't 100% perfect attendance, but essentially the whole church stayed. And it just turned into a really cool once a month dinner together. And we would be there till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And then so after Steve's family came, after Lee came, what's happened over the years is, as our church has grown, there are times, so it seems like every year the average attendance has gone up a little bit, but there are times when it just sort of trickles up, and maybe through childbirth or marriage or something like that, if new people move into town and start coming, sometimes 4 or 5 families come all together, and that has happened several times over the years. And I think right after, so it happened in 2014. I remember that was the first time it happened. And I tell the story sometimes. Our average attendance that year, I went back and looked later, the first half of 2014, our average attendance was 45. And the second half of 2014, our average attendance was 75. So we went up by 30 people average that one year, which was huge for a tiny church where we all knew each other. 2015, we actually, it shrunk back down a little bit. But then in 2016, it started to go up again and never looked back. And it would do that. We'd have our average would jump. So 3 or 4 families are coming together. They're friends, and for whatever reason, they need to find a new church, and they'll all come together. One of the things that we started praying for early on in our ministry is we had. So Lee talked about how he and his cousins were the youth group. Well, my
Right.
2 sons were our youth group for a while, and
That's a rowdy youth group.
well, yes, actually, Wester's building trebuchets in the church building, but anyway, so we started praying. We had one other family with some little kids. They had a baby and a toddler, and we were one time at their house and for a church picnic, and she said, the mom said, we're planning to homeschool our kids, and we only know people in the church. That's our entire family, and the church is like our entire community. And there's no kids. Like, our kids don't have any, they're not going to have any friends. And she was concerned, right? She wasn't thinking about like a homeschool co-ops and those kind of other options, but she was concerned about that. And so we, as a church, started praying for kids, and the Lord has not ceased to answer that prayer. For the few years after that, every new family this is seriously true. Every new family that came had 5 kids. Some have grown since then, but every new family had 5 kids. And it's humorous, but it is an answer. That is how God started to answer those prayers. And so now there's kids all over the place. Now I have to say, and I said it on Sunday during church, when I got up to do the welcome at the very beginning, our apostolic greeting, grace and peace to you. I got up to do that and give a couple of announcements, and the kids were particularly noisy. And people are kind of getting settled in, and the kids were noisy, and it was obvious, right? It does not bother me, right? And
I don't even notice it anymore.
Right. It just was one of those days where it was a little bit noisier than normal, and it's fine. Like, I want our moms to know, if you got to take a kid out, that's fine, or dads, whatever, but don't be embarrassed. We are so thankful that there are kids in this church, because for years we had none. And even before I got there, that sort of the old person church, right? It was a dead and dying church. It was just an aging out church. And so I came in and just started preaching, and the Lord worked through that and through lots of other things, including a connection to the pregnancy center, to bring more families in. And in 2018, so the year after then Lee started coming, we ended up, we had another group come in of, I think, 4 families, and with a bunch of kids. So we're talking like 30 more people or something like that, with all the adults and then all the kids. And they were driving a significant distance. Some of them 45, in one case, over 50 minutes each way. And they came together, like they knew each other. They were friends. They were coming from another place that was struggling. And there was a connection actually with Steve here. And so they had known, a couple of the guys had known Steve. And so they came to check it out and never left. And but now we have like a bunch of people that are driving to get here. And so we instituted, all right, let's do some elder lunches, where on the 3rd Sunday of the month, I don't have any idea if people will stay or not, but the elders and our families will commit to stay and having lunch. And if you want to stay and have lunch with us, I want to invite you to stay and have lunch. and everybody stayed. So now we don't even call it that anymore.
Yeah. You forget
Because
that that's what it was supposed to be, something different.
it
But
was to
Right.
get to know you for
Yeah.
the out, like just stay and have lunch with us. Let's get to know one another. And it just, everyone stayed. And it's been that way ever since. And it's been a vital, so I would agree with Steve that the preaching ministry of any church is the focus ministry, right? It should be the centerpiece of the church's ministry, is the proclamation of God's word. There's lots of other really important things connected that you can't not have, but that has to be the central, the right administration of God's word, right? The right preaching of God's word. And fellowship. So if you go to Acts 2:42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayers. And that passage at the end of Acts 2 is this whole thing about how unified the church was, how harmonious, they got along, they shared all things in common, which means whenever somebody had a need, they met it. They shared their meals together. They just loved one another is what all of that means. And that really started to happen at the church. And so around that 2018, 2019, at the end of 2019, we had another influx of, I think, 4 more families that came. Not quite as many kids with this one, but some. And actually, one of those families has had a couple kids since then. And so there was another influx of kids. And along the way, we as the elders would say, so the way that our old church building was laid out, it was built in the 90s. It was a perfectly sufficient building. It was a pole barn style, so it had metal siding. It had a kitchen. It was a sufficient kitchen. The sanctuary was kind of a multi-purpose room, and it was big. Actually, it was almost too big, but it was plenty big enough. We would clear out the chairs that we had set up for worship and bring in tables and eat in there. It had classrooms and bathrooms that were all too small. So we've got lots of kids coming. The classrooms were all just a little bit too small. The bathrooms were too small. We were kind of struggling with that. The septic system was kind of having a hard time keeping up on Sundays because we use it one day a week. So it was kind of struggling with keeping up. And so we started talking about, the well also was having some problems, kind of the same thing. And so we started talking about, like, so what are we going to do here? Like, we needed to do some repairs to the building. It sounds like we need a new well. We might need some new septic work done, but we also really could use some bigger bathrooms and classroom space. And so we started talking about it, and we met with a couple of different contractors and drew up plans. We had at that location, we had plenty of land. So so it was surrounded by farmland as well. So it was a bean field on 2 sides and grass on the other side, actually, where the septic leach bed is. And the neighbor farmer was willing to sell us a couple of acres of the bean field on the other side, so that we could kind of expand some of the parking or whatever we needed to use it for. And so we had this plan in place. We were ready to purchase the land, so 2 acres. We had plans drawn up to add on a kitchen and bathrooms and a couple of big classrooms. And we had contractors in place. They were pulling permits. And this is at the end of 2021. And somebody sends me a text. Actually, my son was looking for something on a realtor's website. He wasn't looking for churches for sale, but he was looking for something on a realtor's website because he was looking for some building. And he saw that our current building was listed on the market. And he just sent me a link and said, "Have you seen this?" And I got looking at it. I got looking at the pictures. I had been in the building a couple of years ago, so I kind of was familiar with it, but I'd only been in it once or twice. So I wasn't real, I didn't remember it completely. And so I'm looking at it like, I just don't think it's big enough. The sanctuary doesn't look big enough. I think it's smaller than ours. Just not sure. And so I said, well, I'm just going to send it to our elders and deacons, and let's just see what happens. And I sent it to him and I said, hey, what do you guys think? And somebody suggested, well, and I don't remember who, maybe we should just go look at it just to rule it out. Let's just do our due diligence. We already had a plan to add on to our facility. Let's just go do the due diligence. We'll go look at it and we'll say, yep, this isn't going to work for us. So onward with groundbreaking. We were literally, so in December, we went and looked at it on December 27th or 28th. And we were planning to break ground at the end of February. As soon as depending on the weather, actually, but that was the idea, is at the end of February, as soon as we could, we were going to break ground. So we were 2 months from starting this construction project. And this building, we found it for sale. And our guys came over and looked at it. And the church that was in here, they didn't have it, like they didn't have the sanctuary. It wasn't full of chairs. It just had like 20 chairs in a circle or something. There was a bunch of other stuff in the room, like an organ and a piano down on the floor and some other weird stuff. And
emphasis on weird.
yeah. And there was some weird stuff. But we got kind of walking around and trying to measure how many seats will it, how many people can we fit in there? And the longer we stayed here, and correct me if were you guys both there when we came to look at it? Probably
I was.
I wasn't. I wasn't an elder yet.
Yeah, he was. We were keeping him as far away as possible, but also pulling him in, but keeping him.
Yeah,
it was a good
this
plan.
Far and no further. So I don't remember if we looked at it a couple times, but the longer we stayed here kind of looking at it and talking about it, the more it kind of was like, I think on most of us, maybe this would work. Maybe we can make this work.
So the funny thing about it was that the sanctuary in the building where Dana is, and the new building, is just shaped very differently from the sanctuary in the old building. So when you first walked through the doors, I think a lot of us were like, nope, this won't work. It's not big enough.
Right.
And then we actually were all sitting in that circle of chairs, kind of looking at it a little closer than when you just first walked through the doors. And I think we had the conversation like, well, maybe it is big enough. It's not set up for, it doesn't have all the chairs set up like a sanctuary. So maybe we're not seeing it clearly. And really, to evaluate the space, we probably need to set up all the chairs and count chairs, because the first impression is there's no way this won't work, because it was basically set up almost like you think of like a Sunday school classroom that was a fraction of the size of the actual room,
right?
Because that's just what met their needs at the time. But and so it kind of grew on us as we sat in that room and discussed it for a while.
Yeah, we actually had, I think, a second time that we came over and we set up a whole bunch of chairs. Mm-hmm. And one of the deacons actually like measured out and like they were trying to figure out, okay, how many chairs can we fit in here? Now, just for context of that, I think in our average attendance, off the top of my head, our average attendance in 21 and 22, in 21 before we moved, was something like 121. So that was our average Sunday morning attendance. That's everyone, kids, everybody. We were cramped in the other church, not in the sanctuary. The sanctuary was plenty big. It was the bathrooms, especially. The kitchen got a little cramped on when we would have our lunches, and the classrooms, especially. When you're adding 6 kids, you're just 6 kids per family. When you're adding all these kids, classrooms that are the size of a bedroom, so 10 by 12 or something. You put 10 kids in there for an hour, it gets pretty tight. So we started measuring out all the chairs, and I maybe even brought some of our chairs over. Not sure we brought them all back, but brought some of our chairs over and, try to figure out how many seats we could fit in here. The other sort of factor in this is the location was a better location for where our members lived. So to go back to what Lee said earlier, it was a small country church, or maybe you both guys said it was kind of a small country church. It was a community. In fact, the name community church was in the name, right? They changed it to that in the 90s. So it was a kind of a small community church, and to move, and it had been there for 198 years. So to move was a really big deal. And it's 8 miles from where it used to be, and it's in a different zip code. But it was much more central to where the people, the members of the church lived. So the move, even though there was a huge risk of, will we lose people? There's always those kinds of risks. Will people be upset if we do something like this? It seemed like a good idea from a location standpoint. It's just on the outskirts of Bellefonte, which is the county seat of our county. So it's the biggest city in our county.
Yeah, don't
Bellefonte's
forget.
a small town, but
the big city, the
Put some respect on its
metropolis
name.
of Logan County.
It's at the high point of Ohio.
That's
High
right.
Point, Ohio.
The pinnacle of Ohio.
City
discounting
on a hill.
Mount Rumpke, but
That's right. City on a hill, a lighthouse. So the location was a kind of a better strategic location, I guess you could say. And the price, like I don't remember the figures, but the proposed construction site, there's always cost overruns. The proposed construction amount to add on to our building and the purchase price were only off by, was it 50,000 or 100?
It was really close. It was very
close. And by the
close.
time we sold our old building, we'll get to that story in a minute. By the time we sold our old building, we were far ahead.
Yeah.
By selling and purchasing instead of building new or adding on. So it was, from an investment standpoint, like a financial standpoint, I guess you should say, it was a better move. It was a little more expensive, but not in the long run. So the location was better. The financially, it was a better move. It had a huge kitchen. It had an additional toilet in each bathroom. So there's 3 instead of just 2. And there's some expansion ability. We haven't done that yet, but there's showers that we can kind of transform into toilets if we need to someday. And then there's, instead of one big room, like a multi-purpose room like we had at the other building, there's 2. And so there's a multi-purpose room in the middle of the building, and then there's actually a dedicated sanctuary, which I love the idea of having instead of having a sanctionasium, we sometimes call it, we have a dedicated sanctuary, and then a multi-purpose room that we call a Thunderdome, that we can set up for lunches and use for all kinds of other things. It's set up now. The ladies' Bible study is in there tomorrow night. There's a couple TVs. So from a space standpoint, the parking is better. The location's better. We really couldn't, like, if you weigh the pros and cons of this move, the pros far outweighed the cons. And
Yes.
But the biggest potential is, well, we really could upset people by even suggesting this, depending on the people in the church. But by this point, by 2021, okay, we'd come through COVID and had survived and thrived. We'd grown actually through COVID.
right.
We survived that. The people trusted us. There was no, so I wasn't worried about that. More of the emotional connection to the old location, which I completely understand, the sentimental connection. I completely understand that. But frankly, a lot of the people who were here at the church when I started in 2012, now 10 years later, were gone. It was a completely different church. The revitalization had done that. It wasn't just that new people outnumbered all the old people. Many of the old people had left. Some had gone to glory, but many had left. And so it was a whole different situation. It's like a whole different church. It really was a whole different church. And And so we presented it. I think when our elders and deacons were all on the same page, we had to talk through some of that. But once we were all on the same page, and we were, I think I wrote up a proposal, or I just asked the church to pray about it. I sent the link to the real estate listing and said, we'll talk about this on Sunday, but we really want you to pray about this. And we had a meeting after lunch that Sunday, and the overwhelming support of the church, or the overwhelming response of the church, and there were questions, was let's do it. It was clear affirmation. Now, there were a few people who expressed some concerns. They were good and right concerns. There was nothing crazy that happened at that meeting or even after the meeting. We did have some conversations after, some people that expressed some valid concerns, things that maybe we hadn't thought about and needed to think about, especially what are we going to do with the old building? There was some concern about sort of the idea of abandoning the community where we lived. That one I kind of can, my answer to that was, the people don't come to the church. Like, they could come. If they are that emotionally invested in the church, really, they're just emotionally invested in seeing your car there. They're not actually emotionally invested in the church. And I live
good point, though.
I live right next door, so I know the neighbors, and so I'm taking a risk of like my neighbors literally next door being mad that that we moved. But the other thing in my mind is, thinking 10 years ago, this church is almost gone. Like, it was almost just shut the doors and donate the building to whoever, whoever, the Amish or something. I don't know. And that would
may it never be.
But so 10 years before, there was this genuine, I thought I was going to be the last pastor of the church. I'm going to be closing this down, and it's going to be done. And the Lord sustained the church, grew it, and then and I committed. We bought the parsonage from the church, in part to say, hey, we're here. Like, we want to be here for the long run. We have no intention of, like, this isn't a stepping stone for me. I'm not trying to go on to bigger and better things. We want to be here, and now the Lord is saying, okay, well, I want you over here, 10 miles this way, 8 miles this way. So we answered as best we could those objections, and as a leadership team, both elders and deacons, we prayed about it and talked extensively about it, and made an offer, and negotiated with the church that was the group of people. I'm not going to call it a church, that was had been meeting in this building, and came up with a good final price and purchased it. And God, in his just incredible grace toward us, we purchased it with cash. The Lord just provided. We have no mortgage on either. We hadn't had one on the other building for years, and we had no mortgage on this building. And so we then, this was in March of 22, we purchased this building, paid cash for it. We knew that we wanted to, it was a newer building than the other one. It's also better made. It's a block building instead of a metal, so it's just a bit higher quality construction. The glass, the windows are all nicer. The interior doors are all like solid. It's just a nicer building. And, but we knew we wanted to paint everything and replace some carpet, do all of that kind of thing. And so we went after it. We had our first, right after we purchased it just before Easter, and we did our Good Friday service here, just to be in the building. We had a great turnout. That was just such a cool night. The place was kind of, it wasn't a mess, but we hadn't started the construction, so it was not us. It was, we felt like we were doing it in a rented place.
Yeah, it did feel rented.
Yeah, it was like we were having church in someone else's church.
Right.
Right.
Even though technically we had purchased it.
Yeah. so over the next couple of months, I think between March and June, people in the church just went all out and painted all the classrooms, did a bunch of, I know, replaced the trim, laid flooring, built a new sound system and security booth. We call it the janitor's closet. So built all that in, and just did a bunch of work to the building, bunch of work in the kitchen. There was this giant exhaust vent of doom, and Lee's mom got up and tore it all down, and
single-handedly.
Yeah, mom and
Yep.
dad again. But it was, and it was, from my viewpoint, I should let you guys talk some about some of this, but one of the best moves we ever made as a church. I've never regretted this move whatsoever, except for when I have to, drive to church. I used to walk to church. Now I drive to church when it's slippery and icy and whatever. Now, oh great! Now I got to drive 10 minutes to church. I'm just totally kidding. I have never once regretted this move, and I don't know if anybody has. Honestly, I don't know if anybody in the church has said, "Yeah, that wasn't a great move." I've never heard that.
No,
I've
me
never
either.
heard that.
Yeah.
One of the people that expressed concern in the meeting that we had that first Sunday when we talked about it, and then expressed concern to us individually, and did it in a really nice way. There was no real conflict, just was expressing concern about the move. Was one of the first people here. We did our first work day where we were cleaning everything, and
First one through the door.
yeah, and cleaned the bathrooms, and like took the worst job type of thing,
Yeah.
right? And has been incredibly supportive ever since. And I'm just thankful to God for all of that. I mean, I can't even say enough about it, because God just really worked all of those details out. Yeah. What about you guys? What's some of your perception of what was going on in those days?
Well, I think that there's a certain value in and of itself in the laboring together, and in kind of a parallel or a similar way that there's a value in eating together. It tends to bond people together.
Yeah.
Laboring together, I think, has a similar effect. When we're in the midst of the mess and we're dirty and sweaty and tired and we got a long way to go, and I'm going to go home and get some sleep and I'll be back here first thing in the morning, and you're doing that together,
Yeah,
that's a powerful thing. And to never have to struggle together in that way, one could make the argument that might not be the healthiest thing year after year after year. There's a time and place for that, and that was certainly the season. There was certainly a season of intensely having to do that for our church, because we kind of, I don't know if gutted the places, right? It's not like we tore down drywall or anything, but it looked very different once we were done with it than when we bought it, and we really changed it dramatically, and what we ended up with. And it was a lot of work. It was a huge amount of work, actually. But that was a blessing to the body in a way that if you didn't have to do that, it was all just, well, let's just move in and do our thing. We may have missed out on that. So I appreciate the work that we had to do.
Or if we just hired we were going to hire a contractor to do the other building.
Right.
And, it would have been cool to show up every week and see the progress, every Sunday, but to see somebody else's progress here, folks did it themselves. And then when we did our first Sunday, I don't remember. I mean, I remember it was the first Sunday in June of 2022 that we had church here. And I remember there was one of the moms said to me, "This is too nice. This is too nice for us. This is too nice." And in a joyful way. She wasn't complaining. but in a joyful way, was like, she was just, I think, as was I, like, just dumbstruck at God's just overabundant grace toward us, provision for this church that literally 10 years earlier was done, was closing the doors, and the Lord just brought us back, and has used the preaching of his word. He's used those things like having dinner together on Sundays to just build the unity of the church. I think somebody, it might have been you, Steve, but somebody said recently, like, you have to try something to the effect of, you have to try not to be loved by the church, right? You have to go out of your way to not feel kindness from the people in this church, or connection to the people in this church.
Yeah.
You have to, like, turn down offers of staying for lunch. No, I'm not going to. Like, you have to try hard not to be connected.
Got to run out the door.
Yeah, you really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And we should recognize that so as elders, not all elders have that. So we truly do thank God regularly for how the people at RBC do warmly embrace whoever God's going to bring through the door, and even jump in there with whatever needs to be done. Sometimes you can see a scenario in a church culture where you start to get a little bit of a consumer mindset, like, geez, somebody should do something about that, right? Somebody should go welcome those new people over there. Who are the people getting paid to go tell that person good morning? That's not my job. We don't have that kind of mindset at all. We have the opposite of that. If something needs done, somebody just grabs a broom. If somebody walks through the door, people they just do it. And what a blessing that is, as elders, to not have to feel like, we're lacking.
Push these people along.
Yeah.
Even the welcoming aspect. One of the things that's kind of changed in my role, like 5-6 years when you guys were first coming, and part of this is we were half the size then, right? So part of this is we were small, or less than half, but part of this is we were smaller then. But it was up to me, or my wife and I, to make sure that we made it to you, to, like, okay, there's a new family here. I wonder who they are. Let's go meet them. And not that other people weren't welcoming, but it was really, like, up to us to do that. And because people were welcoming and other people would do it. But now the difference is, we frequently, like, even the three of us, and also, like, Pastor Ben and Chad, we will frequently say, did you talk to there was a new family, I saw them on the left in the back, but I didn't get to. Yeah. And one of us, or our wives, or whatever, will have talked to them. Like, it's like that spreading out of the shepherding, so that the welcoming part of it. So I'll find people that have been coming for 3 or 4 weeks. There's a perfect example of a younger couple that live like 30 minutes west of here, that have been coming. They moved into town. They moved into this area specifically, and from out of state, and they've been coming. And before I could go up and, like, get a chance to introduce myself to them, they'd already been out to dinner with Lee's family. they'd already, like, yeah, we've already been out to dinner. Like they've been to our house, we had coffee. Like, oh, okay. Great. I mean, I love that.
Yeah, I've told Dana and Lee, I've had on more than one occasion, I try to purposefully seek out the new couple or the new family. And one of the things I will sometimes ask is, so are you looking for a church? And multiple times I've had the person respond, no, I'm here. Like, well, okay, well,
such a good
my name's Steve. It's nice to meet you. They've been coming. And or the other thing that will happen is you see a new person, I got to wait my turn because there's other people, there's members
That's
already
yeah.
engaged in conversations. And so we're very grateful and just
That-
thank God for how our church just gets in there
yeah,
and welcomes.
that happens to me like every week, right? I usually try to stand. My wife and I try to stand at the exit door, and by the time a visitor, not everybody, but by the time a visitor has made their way to the exit door, they've already answered the same questions from four
Yeah.
or five different people. So
Yeah.
sometimes if I see that happening, I don't like, you know what? I'll just find out.
Let
I'll
it
just find
go.
out from Grayson later. I'll just find out
Yeah.
from Steve or
Yeah.
whoever later.
Give them a break.
Right. Yeah. I've already told the story 5 times.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's just a testament to just again how much God has just continued to work in the lives of the people of this church.
Mhm.
I can count on one hand, probably no more than both hands, no more than 10 people who have been at the church consistently longer than we have, my family. And which means there's a whole group of people that didn't like my preaching. Sometimes they don't like when a church starts to grow. It wasn't that same good old boy church, that the feel of the church changed, and so they didn't want it to stay anymore. Okay, I get it. I don't really get it, but anyway, but it wasn't that long ago. Like to say that there's only 10 people here that have been here longer than me is, and I've been here for, this is year 13, I think. So I've been here for a while now, but what do I want to say? That means that there were some turbulent times, and there were, I kind of mentioned 2015, our church shrank a little bit. I don't know what our actual average attendance was that year, but I know that some families that were important to us, to me and my family, left during that time, and that was when we saw our initial growth. And I think I made some mistakes in shepherding through that, shepherding people who had been here for a while, and then you have, 30 new people come in a church of 45. So essentially, you have this whole other church come and join you. There's some challenges there, and people can get, I guess, lost in the shuffle, or feel like they're lost in the shuffle. And so, yeah, I'm just amazed at God's grace in sustaining the church, even through some of those difficult times. And the difficult times that I don't want to play that up too much. The difficult times that we faced, this church had difficult times before I got here. A couple of splits and just some difficult, broken relationships of people who literally were living in the same town, right? That were neighbors, and there were some difficult things that went down, but so I say that to say we've kind of had it easy, and God has blessed us beyond what we deserve. That's for sure. And I just praise Him for it. I just ask that we just remain faithful. Like that's my biggest prayer for our church, is that we as a church would remain faithful. Our elders would preach and teach God's word and not shy away from that, and that the husbands and fathers in the church would be faithful to Christ, to their wives, to their families. Those are my prayer requests for the church, as I see Him continuing to build us. We're in the middle now, since around Easter, of another growth spurt. And it's taken a little bit of time, but now we've kind of gotten into the vacation season too. So it's hard, if you're just looking at numbers, it's kind of weird to follow, but when you're looking at the actual people that are coming in, there's some growth. growth spurts happening, or a growth spurt happening. And so those are folks that need to be shepherded, that need to be cared for. And we just pray that Hebrews 13:17 says that, so it says, obey your leaders, those who taught you the word of God, for they will give an account. And that's that idea in that verse of the elders giving an account to God for how we shepherded and taught the people, is, we don't take that lightly. And it's very sobering thought, right? But the people that are coming in, that's what they need, is to be shepherded and cared for.
Very sobering.
Yeah. Yeah. So like just asking for, like praying for big churches, like that our church would grow, that we'd be this next mega church, whatever. I don't want to do that.
No,
I have not prayed that.
we're
go on
not
record.
praying that. Yes.
No, we just, I mean, this is kind of a joke, but it's not a joke. If I'm going to give an account for the people under my care, I need to know them, and I don't want just a huge crowd of people that I don't even know. I've got to know them. I've got to be able to shepherd them. I'm not interested in growing a huge crowd. I don't want to be the biggest church in town. That's not. I will, whatever God does in our church, is, praise God. And the fact that we've grown to the size that we are, I praise God. And I'm just going to trust him, and if he wants to take us, grow us bigger, his will be done, not mine.
Yeah.
So,
and if he provides the growth, we should have the faith that he would also provide the manpower and resources necessary to take care of him properly.
And this whole testimony that we've been talking about now for however long, this whole testimony needs to remind us that he has been taking care of us.
Yes.
Right? The fact that, for example, the fact that I remember the finances from 2012 to 2022. So that 10 years, we literally had $20,000. The church had $20,000 in the bank in 2012. I remember that. In 2022, we paid cash for this building. That's an incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
And that's God. That's God's doing. Like, I don't know where the money came from.
Right.
The Lord provided it. And just to, I want to tie up one loose thread. The old church building, which is literally in my backyard, the summer of 22, we didn't know what was going to happen to the building. We were talking about it, and what could we do with this or that, and how much is it worth, and all of that. And the brother of a church member contacted one of our elders and said, hey, can I come look at the building for our church? He was a deacon in a Baptist church in DeGraff, and they needed to upgrade their facility. They had an old building with, like the bathrooms were in the basement. And so we started talking with them. He and I met them there. So Chad and I met them there. And then because of Chad's work schedule, I kind of took that over and worked with that church on purchasing. And they purchased by September, I think, of 22, they purchased it from us. And it's from a neighbor standpoint, another incredible answer to who knew that a church in the middle of nowhere would become another church.
Yeah.
Like we were concerned. There was rumors of like a marijuana, not a dispensary, but like a warehouse to supply these stores, like that it would be that, or like a trucking company might buy it and it would be in my backyard. Like, I don't want a bunch of forklifts and trucks and stuff in my. So we start, like, my wife and I were praying about, what are we going to do? We need to, and God provided another church to purchase that. And that's all God's grace, all of it. The whole story is just incredible.
Yep.
What more can you say? I don't know what more you could say about that,
I don't know, and I probably have talked for too long.
but it's a good story. And it's a good reminder for us at RBC, because we did change the name of the church in the course of all this as well, on top of it.
We did.
Yeah.
We didn't get to that.
Yeah.
But it did make sense, if you're not in Logansville anymore, to not be called Logansville Community Church.
Right.
And I do think, even though we kicked around lots of different names, and again, I wasn't an elder at that point, but I have always had opinions, and so I can text my opinions around. But
You're in the
but
opinionated thread, text thread.
but Redemption Bible Church is probably the most succinct way that we could put um the core some of the core values of this church and what we put forward week in, week out, day in and day out, and actually get that in the name.
Yep.
So that was really important too. So just in the way that I think the building has allowed our culture as a church to grow and flourish and be further sanctified. I even think that the precision of our name, of our new name, helps solidify the message that is proclaimed every week, just in the name of the church alone. So,
Yeah.
yet another good and providential change that has happened.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, gentlemen, in our last few minutes, shall we ascend the library ladder, as is our wont?
We should.
Let's ascend.
Steve, what do you have to recommend today?
I have something a little bit different than our usual theological nerddom. Columbus and the Quest for Jerusalem by Carol
Ooh.
Delaney. Obviously it's a biography. Columbus can be a bit of a divisive character from history, and I'm a little bit of a history nerd, and so I'm recommending this because of just the history factor, but also because this book is particularly focused on Columbus as a Christian, and talks a lot about the Christians of his day and how they saw the world and how they perceived what was happening, and how much his travels were connected to how he perceived, in particular, the end of things. And he was very much perceiving his eschatology was informing his life pursuits. Let's put it that way. And like I've said with many books, it would be something interesting to think about. It would also be, it might be good for inspiring some interesting discussions as we think about how we interpret some of those things in our own life. And with this, we have the hindsight of 2020. So we know, I mean, I don't want to ruin it for you, but Jesus did not return in the year 1500. So, spoiler alert. But there was some of that sort of thinking at work in how Columbus was thinking, and a lot of people in his day, and it's a big part of what drove him to do the things he did.
Nice.
So there you go.
Nice. Dana, what do you have?
I have a biography of Robert Cleaver Chapman, R.C. Chapman. This is by Robert Peterson, R.C. Chapman. It's called Robert Chapman, Apostle of Love. There's actually two versions of this book. There's a smaller one too that I usually recommend, for people that just want to read a quick little thing. But this is Robert Chapman. So he would be a contemporary of Spurgeon and J.C. Ryle. So he died in in 1902. He was a pastor. He was actually a Plymouth Brethren pastor in England at that time. There's a blurb on here by Spurgeon that says Robert Chapman was the saintliest man I ever knew.
Wow.
And I have just learned a ton from this. The shorter version I've read 2 or 3 times. It's one of those books where his ministry, like I've sort of, especially early on in my ministry, I kind of modeled what I was doing day in and day out by what he did day in and day out. He's one of these guys from history, these pastors that just was faithful and hardly anybody ever heard of him. I that idea. So I recommend, if you like Christian biographies, this is an excellent one. Robert Chapman, Apostle of Love.
Nice. I have my book. It's over here in this little emphasis spot on my shelf. This is the Revival Year Sermons by Charles Spurgeon.
Ah,
so I was
nice.
I was thinking, since we're talking about, changes in ministry and what goes on over the course of time, this book came to mind. I always recommend reading Spurgeon sermons anyway, but these are specifically from the year 1859, preached in the Surrey Gardens Music Hall. So this was a time of transition for Spurgeon himself as well, and just very, very fruitful. Always recommend Spurgeon. So anytime I get an opportunity, I'll put one of those forward. So
the Spurge.
Gotta love the
Excellent.
Spurgey.
Yeah.
Anything else, gentlemen, for the good of the order?
I think we really need a blessing. It's been a couple weeks.
Bless us, Lee.
So true. Happy to. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Amen.
Amen.